Oh, hello there. I do believe we are live. So, welcome to another fun filled edition of Adam's Music Box. This, of course, is the Saturday stream edition, which is very different from the Sunday stream edition insofar as one comes before the other. And today I want to talk about all of the musicians who have been selling their rights, selling their entire catalogs to major companies, whether they're publishing companies, asset management firms, other companies in the financial services sector, record companies themselves. No matter who they're selling them to, the point is they're selling them to companies that will act in effect as custodians of this intellectual property to do with it what they will as the fiduciary and, more important, the owner, because they'll be acting in their own fiduciary interests as the owner, as opposed to a company that an artist pays or gives a cut to manage their intellectual property. So this has been happening for a few years now, and the trend is only accelerating. And so the big question is, well, there's two big questions, really. There's the question of why, and there's the question of what. And we'll deal with both of those separately because they're interestingly related. So as to the what, so musicians are selling their music. They're washing their hands of it for one lump sum, saying take it. And I've got a list that I wrote down of some of the artists who are doing it. Most of them are legacy artists, and most of them are legacy artists who sold a lot of music in their heyday. There are some interesting exceptions. So let's just look at some of the ones on the list. Bob Dylan. He sold his stuff to Universal Music in terms of his songwriting catalog, and in terms of his master rights, he sold all of that to Sony. Neil Young sold 50% of his catalog to Hipgnosis, which is owned by the alternative asset manager Blackstone, for 150 million. The total Bob Dylan sale was around 600 million when both the publishing and the master rights are included. Stevie Nicks sold most of her intellectual property to a publishing company called Primary Wave for 100 million. Fleetwood Mac as a group sold theirs as well. That price wasn't disclosed. Pink Floyd sold all of their catalog for 400 million. There was a bit of a fight. Roger didn't want to do it. David did. It looks like David won. Genesis and Phil Collins and Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford sold all of their interests in both their solo careers and Genesis to the Concord Music Group for 300 million. Sting sold his music catalog and his rights to the Police to Universal for 300 million. Who else? Kiss is on this list. Not Hall & Oates, but the band Kiss is on this list. Huey Lewis and the News made the news for selling their catalog to Primary Wave. Neil Diamond sold all of his catalog. David Bowie's estate, because obviously this was after he died, sold theirs. ZZ Top sold theirs. The Beach Boys sold theirs. REM sold theirs. Barry Manilow, the Hollies, Tina Turner, Dr. Dre, Leonard Skinner, Journey, the OJs, For the Love of Money. Hopefully they made some doing this. The Ramones, Don Henley, Aerosmith, Backstreet Boys, and then you even have some somewhat younger artists. Wiz Khalifa sold some of his catalog. Nelly sold some of his music as well. That sales to sale. Justin Bieber, the youngest person on this list, sold his music catalog for 200 million. Katy Perry sold hers as well, as did the Red Hot Chili Peppers, at least the pre-2020 material. So it's a long list, and there's lots of artists, all of whom will be very familiar. It's not obscure artists, and the reason for that is simple enough. If you only sold 5 records at a state fair in 1973, Blackstone Asset Management and Sony Records probably won't be interested in buying it. But if you're Fleetwood Mac or Pink Floyd or Justin Bieber, they probably will. Now, what are the reasons behind what's the motivation for the musicians to do this? Well, there's several, and it's not just about a big payday, because a big single payday has its drawbacks, because a lot of that just gets eaten up by taxation, which sucks, but that's a political argument, not a musical argument. But since none of these bands are part of the Ron Paul Institute advocating for the abolition of these kinds of taxes, we have to assume that they or their legal advisors said you should probably do it. So why would they want to take this lump sum, the stuff that they'd lose to taxation notwithstanding? Well, there's several reasons. Maybe they think that the ability to make money off of a music catalog is gone, and they want to sell while the market is hot. There's a strong counter argument, though, which is why would all of these big companies that you would think know more about the business world than musicians, why would they be making bad investments? So that argument to me doesn't really work. What the argument that does work is this, and this mostly applies to the legacy artists. We'll get to the younger ones in a moment. So these legacy artists who were big in the 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s, and these days even into the early 90s, they're not getting any younger. Some of them are long retired. Some of them are sort of doing the legacy circuit, but not with much enthusiasm. And they're probably thinking the following: if I were to just give it to my heirs, assuming they have kids, one, the kids might fight over it. Two, some of it might be lost in terms of inheritance tax, which in some of these cases might be worse than the taxation they have to pay to get the lump sum. Some of them might think my heirs are too stupid to know how to manage this, and they probably wouldn't express it in such language, but they may well be thinking it. Others might be thinking, well, do my kids really want to become full time managers of a music portfolio? Do they want to sign all of the contracts, sign the checks, give people permission, not give people permission? Do they want to deal with all that? And yeah, they could hire someone to do it, but maybe they think, oh, hell, just let Sony and Universal and Blackstone subsidiary Hypnosis, let them deal with it. So I think that is probably the rationale, rather than pass on what is an industrial effort to manage an in-demand music catalog. Again, if you're Pink Floyd and Fleetwood Mac, you will get calls because Domino's wants to use "You Can Go Your Own Way" in under 30 minutes for a Super Bowl commercial, or De Beers Diamonds wants to use "Shine On You Crazy Diamond," a song all about diamonds. It's not. But these are some instances. And do you really want your kids or other heirs to deal with this stuff? Do they know how to deal with it? So I think that's the motivation. So, now, in terms of the younger artists, your Justin Biebers and your Wiz Khalifas, maybe they're thinking the following: the music business is probably decreasing in its artist lifespan. In other words, people still stream Elvis. Not as much as they bought his records in the 50s and 60s and 70s, but they still do. Same with Queen, the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Def Leppard, Van Halen, Frank Sinatra, etc. But maybe they're thinking that that's not going to happen to the artists who made it big from the late 90s onward because of the obvious contractions of the music industry. So maybe the Wiz Khalifas and the Nellies and the Justin Biebers are thinking, look, the music industry has hit its peak. I'm going to cash out at its peak. Or maybe they're thinking, look, if I hold on to the rights to this music, I'll get streaming revenue, which isn't that great, even if you're a super streamed artist. Or I could sell the intellectual property rights to these people, maybe cut some sort of favorable deal where I still retain some of it. Or maybe I just let them manage it, get a lump sum, and focus on my future music and merch, as well as things like podcasts and other social media endeavors. It could be that. And I think that would be a logical way to think. Now, what do these companies want? This to me is a much more interesting question than what the musicians want. Now, obviously, big companies can make bad investments. Lehman Brothers, and sometimes companies that have a great reputation can go downhill. Washington Mutual, very quickly, even if they're at the cutting edge of an industry. Silicon Valley Bank. But let's just assume that at least 50%, 51% of these companies know what they're doing, and they're not actually making bad investments by spending hundreds of millions on music catalogs. So the question is, what are they going to do with it? Well, in the most immediate term, they're going to license it for the following. One, ads, and two other creative endeavors. So movies, series, aka what we used to call TV shows, these sorts of things. And the easy thing about having the music catalog managed by an asset management firm or a record label is that they're not going to be too particular about who licenses the material the way a musician would. Prince, for instance, was very protective of his intellectual property, as so any artist has the right to be, and maybe as every artist ought to be. But now that Prince's estate has sold it off, we could well see a Purple Rain drink by Coca-Cola coming out soon. So those jokes about Shine On Crazy Diamond for De Beers Diamonds, aren't necessarily that far off. Because if you're Sony, you're going to look at the bottom line. How much is Pepsi going to pay to license a Rolling Stones track? How much is Papa John's going to pay for me to license Papa's Got a Brand New Bag for the new, buffalo wings in a bag or something like that? Where James Brown, if he were alive, might think differently, as you could well imagine. So there's that. And then there's a trend that's happening in both the movie and TV business. Increasingly, um, people who produce these series and these movies, whether they're for a cinematic release or for streaming only, they're turning away from original music and going more and more to licensing. And this has really been a trend that happened over the last 10 years, but it's only increasing. Before the 1970s, virtually every film would have its original score. They'd hire a composer, the composer would compose, and then they would go to a major scoring stage, usually located on or near a Hollywood film studio. In the 70s, it became a bit more cool to license music because the 70s was sort of the age where the underground became mainstream in film. Then in the 80s and 90s, it became increasingly common for the filmmakers, the producers, to actually hire well-known pop artists and have them do an original song associated with the film. Think Love Lift Us Up Where We Belong from An Officer and a Gentleman, if I have got that right, if the memory bank is working and the CTE hasn't kicked in yet. So there is that, but increasingly today they're doing what Stanley Kubrick pioneered. Now he did it for very intentional artistic reasons, even though with 2001: A Space Odyssey he actually did commission an original score before saying no, it will be more evocative and interesting if I use Richard Strauss and Johann Strauss, no relation by the way, and Aram Khachaturian and Jorge Ligeti. Wonderful pronounceable word salad there. But he sort of started that trend. And again, he was ahead of his time doing it in the 60s. Others did it in the 70s. But today, a lot are doing it because now that you have people that produce films that aren't all 100% tied to the film industry, you have people that aren't that afraid to spend the money on licensing because they don't want to hire a composer and an orchestra or even a band of musicians or a recording studio, which are becoming increasingly few in number, even in LA. One of the best scoring stages in LA closed years ago, the Tadeo stage in Studio City. So there you go. So when you have companies like Apple and Amazon in the entertainment business, they're thinking, oh hell, just call up whoever owns the rights to come sail away. We're doing a documentary on sailing. We don't want to hire an original band or a composer. See who owns the Styx catalog. That song's not necessarily about sailing, but hey. Who cares? So it's things like that. And even companies that are in the streaming world, but exclusively in the streaming world, your Netflixes and things like that, they're finding that doing sweetheart licensing deals is easier and cheaper than hiring fresh blood to make new music. And much of the reason is that with a lot of the music being taken out of the artist's hands, the catalogs are now in the hands of friendly companies. So let's say an asset management firm that owns shares in Netflix owns the music rights to Neil Young, and everyone sort of does a deal because everyone scratches their back because a lot of these companies, via asset managers or in some cases directly, have each other's shares in each other's portfolios, and thus sweetheart deals can be made. Nothing illegal per se in most cases with this. In fact, I would say in the majority of cases, that's just the way business works. Is it the kind of moral utopia we'd want to live in? Not necessarily. Is it reality? Yes. Is it better than communism? Yes. So there you go. Is it better than what we had 30 years ago? Ups and downs, pros and cons. So that is a big deal because with music that is already made, you don't have to deal with commissions, you don't have to deal with artists, you don't have to deal with, well, I want something that kind of sounds like this, man. Okay, well, here's my record. That doesn't sound like what I was thinking. Well, you should have known what I was thinking. And then they fight, and that's no good. So everyone knows what legacy artists are like. The guy goes into the Netflix office, right? In this scene, I want "What's My Name" by Snoop Dogg. How do we license it? Oh, okay, well that's owned by so and so. Email them. Simple stuff. So this is really important. So in the short term, it's commercials and other creative endeavors where it's easier and increasingly more lucrative for companies to talk to companies and license existing music. Now, what about the future? Ooh, scary future space helmets, rocket ships. Joe Biden. Yeah, the future. So again, must we take this all so seriously? So the future, AI. Ooh, AI music. Well, this is going to be important too, because in order for AI companies building large language models that deal with things other than words, so musical models, sonic models for AI, they're going to need data sets on which to train the models. And in this sense, the owners of these music catalogs will be thinking of their job as holders of data. So all of a sudden, music has been transformed from something artistic to something mildly artistic that is used to sell Doritos and Pepsi to now it is data. No different than financial data or any other statistical data. And they'll be licensing this music to all sorts of AI companies, whether startups with a good budget or to your Apples, your OpenAIs, your Microsofts, to train whatever AI music models they have. And then you'll have record companies commissioning AI models that deal with sound. You'll have them invent things, and all of these will need data. Now, eventually, maybe these models will be able to train each other based on things that other models come up with. But for the moment, just like language based written AI models train themselves on existing pieces of writing, whether from a news media website or from a social media website like X, the music based AI technology will be training itself on existing catalogs. And what if, for instance, because after you've signed your rights away, let's say that let's just say Microsoft. This is for the purposes of education. This has nothing to do with Microsoft. It's just an example. Don't sue me, Bill Gates. Please don't sue me. So let's say that I get he's no longer CEO, but he's a special technology advisor and a major buyer of farmland. That I can say. And he can't even sue me because it is true. Anyway, let's say Microsoft wants to develop an app that's called, let's call it Make Your Own Floyd. Someone with no sense of humor or vivacious intellectual capacity might call it Think Floyd. And so make a Pink Floyd song protesting about the fact that my mother makes me go to bed at a certain hour. Okay, so it scans through the Pink Floyd catalog that has been licensed to Microsoft from Sony. Could happen. And it comes up with a Pink Floyd style music and lyrics protesting that. It's, about a child who builds a wall between himself and the kitchen so he can get into the cookie jar. That's probably an antiquated reality. They're all on fentanyl. Kidding. But there you go. Again, must we take this seriously? So things like that. And we've already seen that the old music labels in the music industry have sort of become the subservient entities, the cucks, if you will, to the technology companies. So what's left of the record labels, and there's really only around two or three. There's Warner, Universal, and Sony. Those are the only three left, and they have interests beyond the music world. Sony itself, they know they make electronics and so many other things. Um, so but even their music entities, their music subsidiaries are sort of, they've been made bitches by your Spotify's, your Apple's, your Amazon's, your tech companies. And so what we're eventually going to see is the culmination of what we're already seeing. And this is the full scale amalgamation between the music industry and the tech industry. It's a process that began when Steve Jobs gave the music industry an ultimatum saying, look, either you price your music on iTunes the way I have described, or get ready to be eaten alive by all of the various Napster clones that you'll never be able to sue out of existence unless you find something that is so cheap and so convenient that it becomes more worthwhile to spend $1 to buy your favorite song on iTunes. This is in the early 2000s before streaming, than to go to your various pirate sites. That was the reality. And so from there and there, the music industry's cachet, or chachi as some would say, has gone down, and the tech companies has gone up. And we're going to see the total amalgamation. And once AI music becomes even more mainstream than it already is, and when AI creation tools become as common as something like Pro Tools and various plugins like Autotune, I think we're going to see that amalgamation reach its apotheosis. So that is why these companies want to buy the music rights, because they see the music as data, and maybe they think that in the future there will be less desirable musical data made by humans than there was in the past. And so it's a gold rush in reverse, thinking, right, whichever human artist comes out in the next few years probably won't have data that is as valuable to train AI, or music to be licensed to Doritos and to Pizza Hut and to Chevrolet and to Jaguar. Hey, did you see that? As would music from an age when the record industry was just more lucrative, and when music played more of a central part in the entertainment and hobby areas of people's lifestyle. So that is probably what they're thinking. And are they overpaying? Well, when you look at the general mergers and acquisition market and what things are worth, if anything, they might be underpaying. I mean, think about it. A large house that a celebrity musician would live in LA used to, you know, 20 years ago might have cost, I don't know, 5 million. Now it's maybe 30 million, the big house on the hill. And some of these musicians, you know, your big rock stars and pop stars, like to have more than one house. And so when you crunch the numbers of what a musician of great renown will spend in a lifetime on houses and cars and substances and, you know, women or men, and the lawsuits to pay off those women or men, then I actually could make a case that when you look at what the revenue was in the golden age of the music industry, and we look at what an artist spends, which is sort of their signal of their worth, because they're collecting all of these non-combustible assets, you know, your houses, your cars, your slaves, well, not around here anymore. uh Again, must we take this seriously? But all of these non-combustible assets, and you do all of the number crunching, you might think, yeah, 300 million to buy a music catalog from a super famous artist, knowing that the next generation of artists probably won't achieve that level of universal fame. Maybe that is a good deal, because um everyone who was alive in the 70s, and many people alive after, could name at least 5 Fleetwood Mac songs off the top, assuming that they didn't grow up in a non-English speaking country, etc. But if you were in America, Canada, England, you know, Scotland, Wales, Australia, you know, Mexico even, because obviously very much in tune with American culture, there you go. And so I think that far from, overvaluing these assets, I think that these companies in this case actually know what they're doing. They see what this music has been worth. They see what the musicians themselves have spent, because obviously they're not going to pay them something that won't change their lives. So they're doing all of this due diligence, and they're seeing that in the future music will be data, and data is one of the big things that is powering the tech industry, which, as I said, is going to become indistinguishable from the music industry. I mean, even today, you could argue the only difference between a record company and a subsidiary of a tech company is that the music labels have a public relations department, an increasingly small compared to the 80s or 90s public relations department. I have a feeling the guys at Microsoft and Apple are clever enough to hire a PR department. So we're going to see the final amalgamation. Um, and so, did the musicians get ripped off? Not necessarily, because again, these people are thinking like musicians. And however rich a musician is, they are not rich compared to the people that owned the record companies in the past, the people who cut the checks. It's the great Chris Rock line about the difference between Shaq and the person who pays Shaq. It's the same thing going on here. So, are the musicians stupid to sell it? If they're worried that their heirs, if they're getting up in age and they're worried that their heirs won't be intelligent enough to know what to do with this intellectual property they've inherited, then yes. If they, however, think that their heirs were clever enough, they should probably hang on to it. But in most cases, they're thinking to hell with it. The kids aren't interested or not intelligent enough. I'll take the lump sum, which is more than good enough for the end of my life, more than good enough for the end of for the remainder, my young kids' life and the grandkids, and be done with it. And the companies are probably thinking jackpot, data, artistic data, the best in the business. And that, my friends, is just one man's theory about what is going on in the music industry, which is increasingly becoming more of an intersection of the tech world and Wall Street than the good old fashioned days of gigging your way up to the top. It is a long way to the top if you want to AI and hedge fund, as ACDC might have said. As always, with these videos, like and subscribe. Share it to your friends, enemies. A click's a click. Do a super chat if you want in the future. Buy a membership, that helps. All that wonderful stuff. So we will see you next time. Take care.